Spoiler, you will die one day, and so will I, soon. Some of you watching this video in the future are watching this at a time where I might even be dead already. This has been a central theme among ancient cultures, going back to the beginning of writing itself. Death, mortality, and why we die. Why can't we live forever? The major Abrahamic religions blame it on sin, when Adam and Eve took a bite from the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. Humanity was destined to die and was cast out of paradise. Simple. There's the answer. Video over. But what if I told you that this was just the exoteric answer for why we die, for the uninitiated, who don't have ears to hear and don't have eyes to see? So they are given the simple task of pistis, or faith, in eternal life. Just believe in XYZ and follow the priesthood of ABC and be saved from death. Those people don't have the gnosis and can't grasp the parables of the sages. And what if I told you there is an esoteric secret for our mortality and sin? Human beings are cursed with the knowledge of death and mortality. And we also are cursed with the knowledge that our loved ones will die one day too. A squirrel is not aware of the fact that his cousins and grandparents are passing away while he jumps from tree to tree looking for another acorn, blissfully unaware of the horrors that surround them, and simply living in the moment, in tune with nature as God planned it. But humans, on the other hand, are cursed with sadness and depression, dealing with death after death for each loved one they share memories with. Consciousness is a blessing and a curse, and human civilization has grappled with these concepts since the dawn of civilization. Imagine the dawn of civilization, where humanity grapples with the forces of nature, the mysteries of life, and the inescapable shadow of death. 7 ancient sources will be examined in this video, from 7 different traditions and 7 parts of the world, scattered across the 7 seas of the ancient world. And there will be some cameos from other ancient texts as well, but mostly centered on the Bronze Age epic of Gilgamesh from ancient Mesopotamia, first in line to be discussed. Second, the Copper Age and Bronze Age ancient Egyptian funerary books, which consist of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Book of Hidden Chambers, and Book of Gates, which sometimes are found together in ancient Egyptian tombs of pharaohs. So for the sake of keeping things simple, I will refer to this as one tradition, called Egyptian Funerary Texts. The third, Prometheus Bound, written as a play by Aeschylus in Athens in the classical period, but has its roots in ancient lore, possibly going deep into the Copper or Bronze Age Black Sea region, modern-day Ukraine and Georgia. Then the fourth, the Homeric Hymn to Demeter, possibly also a Bronze Age tradition from the Myceneans at Eleusis, also handed down to the classical Greeks. Fifth, Works and Days by Hesiod from Iron Age Ionia, which is modern-day Turkey, thought to have possible connections to earlier Hittite Theogonies from the region of Anatolia, handed down to the Ionians after the collapse of the Bronze Age. Sixth, the Orphic Theogonies from ancient Greece's classical period, thought to be rooted in ancient Bronze Age Thracian tradition. According to Plato and later Strabo, the Hellenes owe most of their culture to imported Thracian rites, especially Orphic tradition, which Plato himself was initiated into. And finally, seventh, the book of Genesis from the Hebrew Bible, which in the form we have today, early Hellenistic Jewish creation epic, possibly borrowing themes from all six mentioned, or at the very least, attempts to answer the questions that these texts propose to one another, having roots in some of the oldest literature and traditions in the world, and updated to keep up with the trends of monism and Hellenistic cosmology, while keeping the core identity of Israel alive and in the forefront. In this video, I plan to demonstrate and explore how these seven traditions are interrelated, and how the previous six traditions influence the latter Genesis. I also plan to show how the major differences in these traditions reflect the vast changing of worldviews from time and place, but how these major themes of sin and mortality stay fixed, even if these traditions view these fixed moral axes in different ways. These seven ancient sources from seven different places in four separate languages spanning from 2500 BCE to 300 BCE rise from a timeless quest for meaning. While separated by culture and geography, these stories share a profound exploration of two universal themes: sin/morality and death/mortality, the quest for immortality. Yet how they navigate these themes reveals the distinct worldviews of these authors and their audience.
Before we start, I do a lot of digging on this channel into ancient history, digging through genealogies and lists, letters. But what if I told you that your own family history is out there and accessible? MyHeritage, who I want to shout out and thank for sponsoring this video. MyHeritage is the leading global service for heritage and family research and DNA testing. It's fun and super easy to build a family tree and discover your origins, and you might even find new relatives you didn't even know about who are still alive, which is exactly what happened to me. I was plugging away looking up my family list, and sure enough, there is a whole bunch of them. So apparently there's a whole new branch to my family tree, from my mom's side of the family, that I even need to research. An entire side of my family who's Jewish. What do you know? And check this out. This is a photo of my great-grandmother from Italy. And you can upload these and plug them into the system and even colorize them using the system they have.
Just to show you how easy this is, plug it in, press the button, wait a couple seconds, and then boom, you enhance your image. Then, next thing you want to do is hit this button, colorize, wait a few seconds, boom, fully colorized. Isn't that amazing?
So even if you don't know much about your family origins, MyHeritage can help you build that, with records of ancestors with very little effort. Click the link in the description using my code. It helps out the channel as well. Back to the video. Thank you, MyHeritage.
Let's start with the concept of sin. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, sin is not tied to a moral code handed down by the gods, but is instead connected to the ideas of hubris, humans stepping out of line, becoming arrogant and prideful, provoking the unpredictable wrath of divine beings. Gilgamesh, the hero king, is part god, part man, and at the beginning of his journey, he abuses his power, trampling on his people and provoking the gods. His greatest sin, challenging the cosmic order. In many stories passed down from antiquity, there is some form of deluge or a great flood myth that ends the entire world. Most of these flood myths, whether it be Manu, the first man, according to Indian tradition, warned by a fish that a great flood would come to destroy the world. Prometheus warning Deucalion in Greece that Zeus would send a deluge to end and restart the world, as well as Orphic literature depicting Zeus destroying the entire cosmos with a flood after his son and heir, Dionysus, was ritually torn apart and eaten by Titans. Ahura Mazda warning King Yima in Persia about a great flood that would cleanse the world. Utnapishtim in Mesopotamia being warned by Enki, Ea, that Enlil would destroy the world with a flood, as well as other versions of this centered around Xisuthros or an Atrahasis, showing how Babylonians retold this story over and over and over again in different ways, to the Egyptian funerary texts that talk about Nun or Nu, similar to Hebrew Noah, in which 8 surviving gods in a built ark survive a cosmic flood that restarts the cosmos. The number 8 who survived the Great Flood in the Egyptian funerary sources is exactly the same as the 8 who survive in Genesis with Noah's flood. And Noah and Nu almost sound exactly the same. Both stories have 8 characters survive a great deluge on a boat. Genesis also has 3 sons of Noah survive to populate the New World, which is the same number of sons who Deucalion has after the flood in Greek myth, who populate the Pelasgian world, possibly showing evidence that Genesis was aware of the Greek tradition of the deluge. Not only that, but Genesis seems to also have knowledge of the Babylonian traditions in which Utnapishtim, Xisuthros, or Atrahasis lets off a dove and a raven after waiting 7 days for the flood to subsume, which is almost exactly how Noah is depicted in Genesis, also letting off a dove and a raven after waiting 7 days for the flood to subsume. In Genesis' flood, the world is submerged in water by Yahweh because of the sins of mankind, and the world starts over with Noah and 7 family members. But in the Babylonian and Greek sources, sin is something that the gods subjectively decide to be the case. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the god Enlil decides to flood the world primarily due to his frustration and annoyance with humanity. The text describes how the gods were increasingly disturbed by noise and clamor of human civilization, which disrupted their peace and made them restless. Enlil, in particular, grows tired of the constant chaos and uproar caused by humans, leading him to conclude that the only solution is to wipe out humanity entirely with a massive flood. There is no indication, however, that the flood is caused by any sins done by humans, and thus the deluge is brought upon by the morality of the gods, Enlil in particular. The gods in Mesopotamian mythology are capricious. Their sense of justice is often unclear. When Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu slay the bull of heaven, the gods punish not with a lesson, but with tragedy, Enkidu's death. Here, punishment is swift, but it's not rooted in moral law. Rather, it reflects the gods' frustration with human audacity. Enlil's decision reflects the somewhat capricious nature of the gods in Mesopotamian mythology. The flood isn't portrayed as a moral judgment on human wickedness, as it is in the book of Genesis. Instead, it's more about the gods being inconvenienced and wanting to restore their own tranquility by reducing the noise of human activity. Enlil's action is depicted as divine overreaction rather than a calculated punishment for specific human sins. However, not all the gods agreed with Enlil's decision. The god Ea, or Enki, the crafty trickster god, the creator of humans, the deity of wisdom, direct counterpart to the Greek Prometheus, who warns about the opposed and total destruction of humanity. Out of compassion, Ea warns Utnapishtim, just like Prometheus warns Deucalion, a pious man, about the impending flood and instructs him to build a large boat to save himself, his family, and animals of every kind. After the flood waters recede, Utnapishtim and his family survive, and Enlil is eventually appeased, granting Utnapishtim and his wife immortality as a reward for surviving the deluge. Thus, Enlil floods the world not out of moral judgment, but to alleviate his annoyance with human noise, showcasing the unpredictability and sometimes harsh nature of the old Mesopotamian gods. In contrast to Enlil sending a flood because he was annoyed, in Genesis, Yahweh floods the world because of the sins of humans and plans to destroy and rebuild the world through his chosen servant Noah, as stated earlier, with his 7 family members. Notice how they contrast with one another. In ancient Babylonian tradition, gods define morality how they see fit, and there is no blame on humans for the fate that they are dealt. Rather, the gods are the reason for all the misfortune and misery of humans. In Genesis, God is perfect and can do no wrong. This type of theology was almost nowhere to be found before the rise of Platonism. In classical Greek sources, Babylonian sources, and most ancient myths, the gods are in control, and the gods are far from perfect. They commit crimes, murder, sexual immorality, lie, deceive, and plot. Plato came along, and in a series of dialogues through the mouth of Socrates, pushed the idea that the gods should be virtuous and good, and it is humans who are immoral and thus need to follow the codes of the gods in order to be worthy of Eleusis. We see this type of theology present in the Hebrew Bible and later Hellenistic and Roman-era religions as well. But it might not be Plato's original idea after all. Plato was not shy about having been learned from the Pythagoreans and Magi, and often credited the Egyptians and Babylonians as the main source of his education and wisdom. Pythagoras, Parmenides, Heraclitus, Pherecydes of Syros were some of the most major pre-Socratic philosophers who Plato was influenced by, who all credited Egyptian and Babylonians for advanced math and philosophy. Plato, however, also felt that the Greeks were the best at mastering ideas that others may have come up with. Ideas of sin and mortality are present in Plato, who tells of the myth of a story that has much overlap, if not borrowed from, Orphic theology. The story begins with a man named a son of Armenios from the ancient region of Pamphylia. Fought valiantly in battle, but like many others, he met his end on the battlefield. 10 days later, as the fallen soldiers' bodies were gathered for burial, something extraordinary was discovered. Ur's body had remained untouched by decay, a strange and eerie sign. But the true mystery was yet to unfold. As lay on his funeral pyre, ready to be set ablaze, 2 days later he suddenly revived, and with him he brought a story, a journey through the afterlife. Speaks of realms beyond the mortal world, where the souls of the dead were judged. He described the celestial spheres, of the astral plane, where the righteous were rewarded for their virtuous lives, and the immoral were punished for their sins. It was a vision of reincarnation and cosmic justice, where life, death, and morality were intertwined in a cycle that stretched across eternity. In Ur's tale, the afterlife was not just a resting place but a crossroads where the fate of the soul was determined and the journey of existence continued. In the Republic, Plato introduces the myth of through a conversation between Socrates and Glaucon. Socrates asserts that the soul is eternal and indestructible, and uses the myth to illustrate how the choices we make in life shape our fate after death. He explains that the character we cultivate, whether virtuous or corrupt, has lasting consequences. Earlier in Book 2, Socrates notes that even the gods can be deceived by a manipulative individual who appears outwardly just but is inwardly corrupt. Such a person, though praised by society, might gain divine favor, while the truly just, wrongfully condemned, may suffer. The myth of reveals the deeper truth. After death, the masks fall away, and those who lived falsely pious lives or were immoderate are exposed when they choose their next incarnation. Some, driven by ambition, select the lives of tyrants, unaware of the suffering it will bring. Interestingly, those who lived ordinary, balanced lives tend to choose similarly modest paths in the next life, not out of wisdom, but out of comfort in the familiar. Conversely, those who experience great suffering may become so disillusioned with humanity that they seek the lives of animals, distancing themselves from the human condition entirely. In contrast, the philosophic life offers clarity. By understanding the forces that shape character and destiny, philosophers are better equipped to make wise decisions when choosing a new life. While success, fame, and power might yield fleeting rewards or punishments, true philosophic virtues provides enduring benefits, ensuring wiser choices in the eternal cycle of life and rebirth. Orphic golden tablets, known by scholars as Totenpass, which means death passports in German, are found throughout the entire Mediterranean, from Italy to Israel, dating between 500 BCE through the Common Era, in which mummified bodies of the dead wore a golden leaf around themselves with a message that closely ties with Plato's myth of One reads, "You will find on the right in Hades halls a spring, and by it stands a ghostly cypress tree where the dead souls descending wash away their lives. Do not even draw nigh the spring. Further on, you will find chill water flowing from the pool of memory. Over this stand guardians. They will ask you with keen mind, what is your quest in the gloom of deadly Hades? They will ask you for your reason why you have come. Tell them the whole truth straight out. Say, I am the son of Earth and starry Uranos, but Uranos is my birth. This you know yourselves. I am parched with thirst and perishing. Give me quickly chill water, flowing from the pool of memory. The kings of the underworld will take pity on you, and will themselves give you water from the spring divine, the water of life. Then you, when you have drunk from the water of life, traverse the holy path, which other initiates and Bacchus tread in glory. After that, you will rule amongst the other heroes." Some scholars think these are Pythagorean, some Orphic, while others emphasize the Egyptian influence. In the Egyptian funerary text, Osiris is depicted with his servant Anubis, and they weigh the hearts of the dead. This is arguably the oldest known tradition of a single god in the underworld that judges the dead and determines the fate of souls who perish. In Mesopotamian text, there is a council of Anunnaki. In Egyptian funerary text, Sin or Mortality is based upon the 42 laws of Ma'at, goddess of truth and justice, and the soul, called Ak, was brought before Osiris, who the Greeks equated with Dionysus and Hades. And he would weigh the heart of the soul against a feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. Egyptian sin and morality was set by Ma'at, and eternal life, immortality, was in the hands of Osiris. Very similar to Plato's idea that humans who live a good life should be judged accordingly by the gods. Egyptian funerary texts were intended to aid the deceased in not dying a second death, similar to the Orphic golden tablets, and to aid in becoming one with Osiris in the underworld. Similar to the Orphic death passports, Egyptian funerary texts would often give a selected, initiated secret wisdom or instructions on how to achieve immortality, a sacred communion with Osiris, in which a kind of Eucharist is involved. Specific instructions for the dead initiate to drink magic wine and eat magic bread or some form of water of life in order to come forth by day and be with Osiris in Duat, the Egyptian underworld, and was commonly found in Egyptian tombs. Magic plants are common in Greek mythology. When Prometheus was chained to a Scythian rock in the Caucasus Mountains for his sin of giving fire to mankind, and his liver was eaten daily by an eagle, his liver would then regrow just to be eaten again, repeated for eternity. Prometheus bled ichor, a golden blood-like substance that would cause a magical herb to sprout when it touched the ground. This ichor of Prometheus was gathered up by Medea, the ancient witch of Colchis, the eastern coast of the Black Sea, and anyone who drank the ichor would stay young forever and become immortal. So long before Jesus of Nazareth's blood gave eternal life, after he was sacrificed for the sins of mankind as a ransom to God the Father, there was Prometheus, whose blood also gave eternal life after he was sacrificed for mankind as a ransom to God the Father. Ambrosia is the food and sometimes the drink, along with nectar, of the gods, believed to grant immortality and divine power to those who consume it. It sustains the gods' eternal life, keeping them youthful and free from pains and limitations of mortality. In Homer's Iliad, the gods apply ambrosia to the body of the dead warrior Sarpedon to preserve it. The food is sometimes used to maintain or restore life. In some stories, consuming ambrosia grants mortals immortality. For example, Heracles, after his mortal death, was given ambrosia and nectar by the gods, which transformed him into an immortal god, allowing him to reside on Mount Olympus. Ambrosia can bestow divine qualities. In the Latin versions, Hercules is given the spot at the right hand of Jupiter after he transcends into godhood. Ambrosia can bestow divine qualities, potentially making a human superhuman or even a godlike figure. In the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh searches for a magic plant that will make him young again and grant him immortality. Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh that at the bottom of the sea there lives a boxthorn plant that will make him young again. Gilgamesh, by binding stones to his feet so he can walk on the bottom, manages to obtain the plant. However, unlike Heracles, Gilgamesh ultimately learns that immortality is not meant for humans, and that death is an inevitable part of the human condition. The epic presents mortality as an unavoidable reality, and the god's gift of immortality is reserved only for a select few. Quest for immortality in Babylonian tradition is not linked to sin, but rather to the natural human desire to transcend death. In the end, Gilgamesh comes to terms with his mortality by realizing that he can achieve a form of immortality through his deeds, legacy, and the civilization he leaves behind. In Genesis, sin takes on a more defined role. It's a direct disobedience to God's commands. Think back to Adam and Eve, whose transgression in the Garden of Eden sets the stage for the human condition. They eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, a magic plant, and most scholars propose to be a pomegranate, as it is one of the earliest domesticated plants on the Eastern Mediterranean and was depicted as such in early art, contrary to what many think as an apple, which later became the tradition of Western Europe, hence the phrase Adam's apple. A 2nd century rabbi from this time of Hadrian stated that the forbidden fruit in Genesis was grapes. 3rd Baruch mentions that the fruit of knowledge of good and evil is a grape, suggesting that it was made into wine, and the Zohar explains similarly that Noah attempted but failed to rectify the sin of Adam by using grape wine for holy purposes. Others suggest figs or even psychedelic mushrooms, but the pomegranate or grape is much more interesting for 2 major reasons. First, the pomegranate. In the hymn to Demeter, a central text for the Eleusinian mysteries, the pomegranate is the same fruit that Persephone, known as the Kori, translated as young maiden, sometimes even virgin, and Eua, another title, chanted in honor of Persephone. She takes a bite of pomegranate seeds after she is brought down to Hades against her will. In contrast to the serpent in the garden, encouraging Eve to take a bite from the fruit, Persephone is warned by Hecate not to eat any food or take any drink while in Hades. By the time this warning has come, it is too late, and Persephone, called Eua, has eaten 6 pomegranate seeds. Due to this, Persephone is bound to spend part of the year in Hades and the remainder of the year with her mother Demeter in Olympus. Unlike Eve, who is cast out of paradise, Eua is kept down in Hades, or in a sense, she is cast out of Olympus for part of the year. The parallels are striking. Both are either warned or encouraged by a third party, and both are either cast out or kept in another realm. And the title of Eua sounds eerily similar to the Hebrew Heva, which is Eve. Another sacred beverage is consumed in the hymn to Demeter, the koukeon. This beverage, thought to be comprised of psychedelic properties, consisting of fermented ergot from grain, was consumed by Demeter after searching and wandering around the country of Attica for 9 days and 9 nights. Her rage punishes the world with dying crops and dying vegetation. In this tradition, like the Babylonian, the gods' actions and morality is what causes the fate of mankind, not the sins or morality of mankind. Furthermore, the theme of mortality is heavily abundant throughout the hymn of Demeter. Demeter, who was introduced as Lady of the Harvest, who reaps with a golden sickle, is directly responsible for the abundance of fruits and wealth, and is the mother of Plutos, wealth incarnate. None of the immortals, nor any mortals, heard her voice, not even the olive trees that produce splendid fruit, showing the separation between gods, mortals, and the initiated. Again, mortality is not tied to sin here, but to fate itself. So bitter was the pain that seized Demeter's heart that she tore from her head a gossamer veil, the veil that covered her divine hair, and threw over her shoulders a great black cloak, the mantle of death. So great was her grief that she refused the taste of ambrosia and sweet nectar, and shunned baptismal water. Later in the story, Demeter is offered a cup of wine, sweet like honey, but Demeter refuses and instead is given a sacred potion by Lady Metanera from the house of Callias in Eleusis, and the potion consisted of barley, water, and tender leaves of glecon. Demeter, called Deo, is given the sacred potion as precedent for the mystery. As a payment for this hospitality, which the gods honor above all else, Demeter takes the child of Metanera, called Demophoon, and anoints this child, and places the child in fire, in order that she may make him immortal. And she suckles the child, and he grows to be like a god, and he, fed not on mother's milk, but upon ambrosia, the food of the gods, in which Demeter anointed him, anointed as if born a god himself. This reflects the older Bronze Age idea that humans are destined for mortality unless the gods intervene, and there is no code of honor that can change that. Nor does morality have anything to do with immortality, but hospitality is shown to be the highest moral good that one can do. Good hospitality, shown by Demeter to Metanera, led the goddess to anoint her son and grant him immortality. Xenia, also called hospitium, is the ancient Greek custom of hospitality as a divine right of the guest and divine duty of the host. This moral code was prevalent throughout the ancient world, and even in later times the Roman poet Ovid retold the Phrygian myth of Bacchus and Philemon, who give good hospitality to Zeus and Hermes, who are in disguise, and they are granted one wish by the gods, in which they are given their own temple. The blessings and curses on humans are completely tied to the will of the gods and nothing else. This seems to be the trends among the oldest traditions that we find, mostly Greek and Babylonian. The next candidate for the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, argued by early Jewish sages, was the grape. The grape, compared to the pomegranate as the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, is arguably even more compelling and intriguing than the pomegranate. But before I explain why, let's talk about the Orphic Theogony. Found in various forms around central Greece and Macedonia, such as the Derveni papyrus, and also fragments found in writings of pre-Socratics, such as Pherecydes of Syros, and even later Plato. Unlike the Theogony of Hesiod that ties all fate to morality of the gods, the Orphic Theogonies seem to be more philosophically informed and center the fate of mankind around the morality of the individuals, allowing for humans to have dual nature, which is ultimately flesh versus spirit, a theme very common in later Christian circles. The idea that the divine and immortal soul is trapped within fleshly matter has its origins in the Orphic myth of Zagreus, who is the baby Dionysus, born from Persephone and Zeus. You see, the Titans did what Adam and Eve are charged with. They ate from the forbidden fruit. Let me explain. According to Orphic thought, before the world had mortals, there was just immortal gods. The Titans and the Olympians and the primordial gods coexisted for a time. Then Zeus, the highest and ruler of the cosmos, made love to the queen of the underworld, Persephone, who was called Kore, the young maiden, and Eua, the same goddess who ate the pomegranate earlier. And as a result of her and Zeus's union, they gave birth to Zagreus, who is the firstborn Dionysus, called the Divine Child, who was chosen to be the heir of Zeus and one day rule the entire cosmos. An honor that has never been seen before, not even Apollo. Even Zeus and Kronos before him had to win the throne of Olympus by ways of war. But for the first time in cosmic history, a divine child was born and made heir and logos of the highest god, Zeus Hypsistos. As predicted, this did not rub some the right way, and Hera, in her rage, sent the Titans to go and find the baby Zagreus and ritually tear him apart, boil him, and consume his flesh. And this is exactly what they did. But here's the crazy part. Zagreus is the fruit of the tree of life. Let me explain. According to Drs. M.L. West and Carl Karenyi, referencing Hesychius' definition of Zagri, Zagreus seems to be connected to the Greek roots zoe and zoon, which mean life and living creature. This implies that the name Zagreus might be connected to the concepts of life, perhaps symbolizing vitality or the essence of living creatures. Zagreus, who later becomes Dionysus, is the god who represents the swelling of fruits, and most of all, the grape, the fig, and the pomegranate, as well as all vegetation in general, and trees, vines, and growing ivy. In the Orphic Theogony, Zagreus or Dionysus is a perfect replacement for the tree of life, but forbidden from the Titans who ate his flesh. This caused Zeus to get so enraged that he sent a deluge that would wipe out the entire cosmos, and Zeus killed all the Titans with his thunderbolt. and after the Great Flood, Zeus took the corpses of the Titans, who had still had the consumed flesh of Zagreus within their stomachs, and used the flesh that contained half Titan, half Zagreus to create humans. As a result, humans are part divine, part mortal, with Titan flesh, sarx, that decays and dies, and Dionysian spirit, or Suke, that is immortal and lives forever. This is the origins of body and spirit. The concept of original sin in the Orphic tradition, particularly linked to the myth of Zagreus, is one of the most frequently referenced ideas in discussions about humanity's inherent dual nature. Common source for this interpretation is found in Plato's Laws, 701b, where the term Titanic nature appears. This reference has often been read as an indication that Plato was aware of the myth in which humans are created from the Titans who killed and consumed Dionysus Zagreus, an act that embodies the idea of original sin in Orphic theology. Plato's mention of Titanic nature, referencing this Orphic doctrine, serves as an illustration within his argument, pointing not to the murder of Zagreus, but to the Titans' rebellion against the gods. This shift in focus emphasizes the broader theme of cosmic disobedience, rather than the specific myth of humanity's sinful origin. Cicero recognized this interpretation, and more recently this view has been expanded on by arguing that Plato's reference must be understood within the framework of the dual nature of mankind, a key theme in both Platonic and Orphic thought. Plato highlights the Titanic nature in the context of lawlessness, where individuals rebel against authority and traditions, and even reject the basic moral rules of society. This rebellious attitude mirrors the ancient mythological rebellion of the Titans, suggesting that humans, when given too much liberty, are prone to unleashing their inner Titanic nature, thus abandoning order and justice. By linking the passage in Laws by Plato, 701b, with another in Laws, 854a, we can see that both texts hint at the same Orphic idea of a deep-seated moral flaw, or original sin, inherited from the Titans. Still, these passages need to be read in their proper mythological and philosophical context. The first reference pertains to the Titans' rebellion against the gods, a myth of defiance that later resulted in pitched battles and ultimately the triumph of the gods. This rebellion, in turn, is often connected to humanity's flawed nature, a central element in Orphic notions of original sin, where humans carry the stain of the Titanic transgression within them, something extremely prominent in later Judeo-Christianity. Plato often uses Orphic themes throughout his works, humans being part Dionysian, divine and pure, spirit, Suke, and part Titanic, corrupt and chaotic, sarx, a concept that aligns with the anthropogony found in Olympiodorus. The Pythagoreans before Plato also held to the doctrine of immortality of the soul, just as the Orphics did, and the Pythagoreans also taught allegories tied to their teachings related to human fate, such as the ancient story of Heracles at the crossroads. They use the Greek letter upsilon, which looks like an English Y, which branches into two paths as a symbol of this idea within their school of thought. When a person reaches the age of reason, they are faced with two possible paths. One is smooth and pleasant at first, but it leads to a terrible end. This represents the path of pleasure, anasuke. The other path is difficult and steep at the beginning, but leads to virtue, arete. Although the road to virtue is hard, those who make it to the top find rest and relief from their exhaustion. This contrast is often depicted in funerary reliefs. At the base of the stele, the deceased is shown working through life's labors like Heracles, while at the top they are seen resting peacefully on a couch. Heracles is the model for the Pythagoreans to live after. This shows that the Pythagoreans believed that individual morality was tied to fate, rather than the more ancient idea that the gods are in total control of all fate. One of the oldest surviving myths in Greek is Hesiod's Works and Days. In this story, we are told about Pandora, who shows obvious parallels to Eve from Genesis. Like Eve, Pandora was the first mortal woman created by the gods, commissioned by Zeus as part of a plan to punish humanity for receiving the gift of fire from Prometheus. Prometheus is called the craftiest and the trickster, like the serpent who gives Eve the fruit is also called the craftiest and a trickster. After Prometheus defied Zeus and gave fire to mankind, Zeus decided to send Pandora to Earth as a means of retribution. Pandora was crafted by Hephaestus, and each god endowed her with a particular gift: beauty, curiosity, and charm. Pandora was given a jar, often mistranslated as box, by Zeus, which she was forbidden to open. Forbidden to eat, forbidden to open. However, driven by her curiosity, Pandora eventually opened the jar, releasing all the evils of the world: disease, suffering, pain, and death, which spread across humanity. Realizing what she had done, Pandora closed the jar, but the only thing left inside was hope. Thus, hope remained for humans to cling to in times of suffering. Pandora, like Eve, is blamed by mankind for their sufferings. In the book of Genesis, Eve is the first woman created by God from Adam's rib to be his companion in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were allowed to enjoy all the fruits of the garden except for one, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God specifically instructed them not to eat from this tree. However, the crafty serpent, described as cunning and deceitful, approached Eve and tempted her. The serpent told her that eating the fruit would not lead to death, as God had warned, but instead give her knowledge and make her eyes opened like the gods, knowing good and evil. Tempted by this promise, Eve ate the fruit and then gave some to Adam, who also ate. This act of disobedience opened their eyes to the gnosis of good and evil, but it also brought sin, suffering, and death into the world, just as Pandora brought in for opening the jar. As punishment, Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, and humanity was condemned to live with pain, suffering, and mortality. Not only are both Pandora and Eve the first woman created by divine beings, their creation marks the beginning of human suffering and a turning point in the relationship between the divine and humanity. Pandora is given the jar that she is forbidden to open, while Eve is forbidden to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In both stories, the act of disobedience, Pandora opening the jar and Eve eating the forbidden fruit, results in the unleashing of suffering and death upon humanity. Pandora's curiosity drives her to open the jar, releasing all the world's evils, just as Eve's temptation to gain knowledge causes her to eat the fruit. In both cases, the curiosity of the first woman is a key theme, and their actions set off a chain of events that affect all humankind. In Pandora's case, after all the evils are released, hope remains in the jar, symbolizing that even amid suffering, there is still something for humanity to hold on to. While the immediate consequence of Eve's disobedience is expulsion from Eden, later Judeo-Christian traditions interpret the story as a precursor to redemption through divine grace. Epimetheus and Adam have many parallels. Epimetheus is Pandora's husband, also the brother of Prometheus, and Adam from Genesis share a similar role as passive recipients of the actions initiated by the first woman. Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought or hindsight, had been warned by his brother Prometheus not to accept any gifts from the gods, but he ignored the warning and accepted Pandora, leading to the release of the world's evils. Adam, similarly, had been directly told by God not to eat from the tree of knowledge, yet he passively takes from the fruit from Eve and eats it, resulting in humanity's fall from grace. In both stories, Epimetheus and Adam are not the initiators of the transgressions, but are participants in the consequences of disobedience. Their failure to prevent or reject the action causes them to share in the responsibility for the suffering that follows. Prometheus and the serpent both play a role as the trickster figures in their respective myths. Each is responsible for offering or facilitating the acquisition of forbidden knowledge or power that leads to humanity's fall. Prometheus, whose name means foresight, defied Zeus by stealing fire and giving it to mankind, an act that symbolized knowledge, power, and independence for humanity. His actions led to Zeus's wrath in the creation of Pandora, whose jar of evils would balance out the gift of fire with suffering. The serpent in Genesis plays a similar role as the one who tempts Eve to eat the forbidden fruit by promising her knowledge and the ability to be like God. The serpent represents deception and cunning, just as Prometheus represents defiance and subversion of divine authority. Prometheus and the serpent are associated with rebellion and the introduction of divine knowledge, fire in the case of Prometheus, and knowledge of good and evil in the case of the serpent. Both figures disrupt the established order and trigger the events that lead to human suffering. These acts of defiance introduces sin into the world. Unlike the Sumerian and Greek gods, the god of Genesis is more personal, more invested in humanity's moral choices. Sin here isn't just a disruption of cosmic order, it's a breach of trust between humanity and its creator. Divine justice, then, is not arbitrary, it's purposeful, a direct consequence of moral failure. These texts are haunted by the specter of mortality, but they treat it very differently. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero's quest is driven by the stark realization of his mortality after the death of Enkidu. Here, death isn't the punishment for sin, it's the natural state of humanity, and Gilgamesh's journey to the ends of the earth is a desperate attempt to find the secret of eternal life. Along the way, he meets Utnapishtim, a figure who has achieved the immortality Gilgamesh so desperately craves. But the message is clear. Immortality is for the gods, not for humans. Gilgamesh returns home with a different kind of wisdom. Not the promise of eternal life, but the understanding that legacy and the impact of one's deeds are the only ways humans can achieve a form of immortality. Contrast this with Genesis, where mortality is explicitly tied to sin. Before the fall, Adam and Eve dwell in the Garden of Eden in a state of blissful, unbroken life. It's their disobedience, eating the forbidden fruit, that leads them to death. Mortality here is not inherent to the human condition, it's a penalty for sin. God expels Adam and Eve from Eden, cutting them off from the tree of life, and thus from the chance of eternal life on earth. The focus in Genesis is not just on living a good life, but on the spiritual implications of obedience and sin. Eternal life, for the biblical tradition, will later be promised through divine grace, rather than through human questing. The myth of Prometheus Bound and the concept of original sin share intriguing thematic parallels, despite originating from different cultural and religious traditions. Both stories explore dynamics of divine authority, human transgression, and the consequence of challenging or disobeying higher powers. These two ancient myths, both dealing with forbidden gifts of knowledge and the consequences of challenging divine authority. When Prometheus defies Zeus by stealing fire to give to humanity, fire here is more than just a physical tool. It represents gnosis, or knowledge, or technology, and the power to shape human destiny without the gods. With fire, humans can cook, create tools, and ultimately build civilization. Prometheus's gift elevates humanity, granting them independence from the gods and the potential to advance as species. Prometheus's defiance doesn't come without a price. Zeus, enraged by this theft, punishes Prometheus by having him chained to a rock, where an eagle eats his liver every day, only for it to regenerate at night. Prometheus's punishment is not just for his rebellion, it's a reminder of the danger of giving humans godlike powers. Prometheus is often seen as a tragic hero, a champion of humanity who suffers for his decision to sacrifice himself to bring knowledge and power to mortals. In the book of Genesis, the serpent plays a similar role as an intermediary between divine and humanity. But this is seen as evil according to the theology of the ancient Judeo-Christian worldview. These myths reflect deep questions about the nature of humanity's relationship to the divine. Should humans challenge divine authority in pursuit of progress? Or is the desire for forbidden knowledge a dangerous temptation that leads to downfall? Both Prometheus and the serpent leave us with a complicated legacy. Gnosis brings power, but it also brings suffering. It can also be a curse, and the line between heroism and transgression is never fully clear. This ancient split on morality plagues the ancients, from the Devas versus the Asuras in ancient India, in which Vedic Brahmin priesthoods chose to devote themselves to the Devas, and the Persian Magi instead chose to honor the Asuras. And we find this reflected in the myth of the Titans versus the Olympians, as well as the Watchers, fallen giants who get called daemons, at eternal war with the angels of Yahweh. Even down in the Common Era, this schism continues with the Gnostics and the Orthodox Church. This is the very question that plagues humanity today. Does humanity have no choice but to submit to the will of the gods and accept our fate as nothing more than mortals? Go into darkness? Or enlightenment? Do we take a bite of the fruit, steal the fire, make ourselves immortal, join Dionysus in Elysium, and become initiated and take part in the ambrosial nectar of the gods, as Demophoon was chosen to do? These 7 ancient texts from 7 places scattered by the 7 seas of the ancient world: the Epic of Gilgamesh from Babylon, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Greek Homeric Hymn to Demeter, Thracian Orphic Theogony, Scythian Prometheus Bound, Ionian Hesiod Works and Days, and Judean Genesis, all centered around themes of mortality and morality in some way, but all coming at it from a different traditional perspective, and each one being profoundly influential on modern religion and philosophy today. You have just attained true gnosis.